The cold, biting words still echoed in her ears, a public condemnation delivered with a smile. Her ex-husband Gregory had just spent 10 minutes systematically dismantling her character in front of the city's elite, his arm wrapped possessively around a woman draped in diamonds. He called her simple. He called her a failure. He painted her as a charity case he had graciously cut loose. Every eye in the grand ballroom was on her, a sea of pity, judgment, and cruel curiosity. She stood frozen, a lone island in a glittering ocean of contempt. She was about to turn and flee to surrender the field to him once and for all. But then a quiet voice cut through the noise, a voice that belonged to the one man no one dared to cross. And he wasn't speaking to Gregory. He was speaking to her. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a seed catalog. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that felt heavy with unspoken obligations. The embossed silver lettering of the Starlight Charity Gala shimmered under Audrey Miller's kitchen light, a relic from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. For 7 years, this gala had been the glittering apex of her social calendar. As Mrs. Gregory Dawson, she would spend months planning her attire, her jewelry, her talking points. It was a performance, and Gregory was her demanding director. Now, standing in the modest kitchen of her 2-bedroom apartment, the invitation felt less like an opportunity and more like a subpoena. A year had passed since the divorce, a brutal, soul-crushing affair where Gregory's high-powered lawyers had painted her as a grasping, incompetent woman, undeserving of the life he had so generously provided. They had stripped away her assets, her confidence, and her name, leaving her with a settlement that was just enough to be insulting. He had taken the sprawling mansion, the shared friends, and the life they had built. Audrey had been left with her freedom, a concept that felt as terrifying as it was liberating. She had spent the last 12 months rediscovering the woman she was before Gregory. Audrey Miller, a pastry chef with a gift for creating delicate architectural desserts. She had poured her meager savings and boundless energy into opening a small bakery, the Gilded Spoon. It was a struggle. The hours were long, the profits were slim, and the constant fear of failure was a bitter taste in her mouth. But the scent of baking bread and melting chocolate was her therapy. The joy on a customer's face as they bit into one of her creations was a small, defiant victory. It was hers. All of it. "You're not actually thinking of throwing that out, are you?" Jenna, her best friend and unpaid business advisor, asked from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Audrey sighed, dropping the invitation onto the flour-dusted countertop. "I was thinking of burning it. It feels more ceremonial." Jenna set the coffees down and picked up the card. "The Starlight Gala. This is the biggest event of the year. The mayor will be there. Corporate sponsors. Potential catering clients for miles. Gregory will be there." Audrey countered, her voice flat. "He's on the host committee. He'll be there with her." Her was Tiffany Royce, the 20-something heiress Gregory had left her for. Audrey had seen the photos splashed across society blogs, Tiffany clinging to Gregory's arm, wearing jewels that could fund the Gilded Spoon for a decade. Tiffany with her vacant smile and a pedigree that Gregory found far more suitable than Audrey's humble origins. "All the more reason to go," Jenna insisted, her eyes flashing with protective fire. "You can't let him think he's chased you out of town. You need to walk in there with your head held high and show everyone that Audrey Miller is not just surviving. She's thriving." Thriving Jenna. "I spent this morning debating whether I could afford premium vanilla extract. I have dough under my fingernails and I haven't slept more than 5 hours a night in 6 months. That's not thriving. That's clinging to the side of a cliff with a spatula." "It's called building a dream," Jenna corrected gently. "And you look incredible doing it. Look, you don't have to be Mrs. Dawson anymore. You don't have to perform. You can just be you. Go have a glass of free champagne, schmooze with some rich people who might need 1,000 petit fours for their next party, and let Gregory see what he lost." The thought was terrifying. The idea of facing that crowd, the whispers, the pitying looks from women who used to call her a friend. It was nauseating. Gregory was a master of public humiliation. He knew precisely where her insecurities lay and how to exploit them with a well-placed smirk or a condescending phrase. He would relish the opportunity to display her as a fallen woman, a testament to his own brilliance and her failure. But then a different thought crept in. A small, stubborn ember of defiance. Why should she hide? She hadn't done anything wrong. She had supported Gregory's career, hosted his soulless dinner parties, and swallowed her own ambitions for the sake of his. She had poured her heart into a marriage he had treated like a business merger. Hiding felt like an admission of guilt, a confirmation of the lies he had spun about her. Jenna seemed to read her mind. Don't give him that power, Audrey. Don't let him write the final chapter of your story. This is your chance to start a new one. Later that week, Audrey found herself in a high-end consignment shop, the kind of place she never would have entered as Mrs. Dawson. She found a dress tucked away in the back, a deep sapphire blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It wasn't covered in sequins or brandishing a famous designer's label. It was simple, elegant, and timeless. It had a quiet confidence that resonated with the woman she was trying to become. When she tried it on, it fit as if it were made for her. It was a fraction of the cost of her old gala gowns, but it felt more valuable. It felt like her. As she stood before the mirror, she saw not the shattered ex-wife, but a woman standing on her own. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach. But now it was mingled with something else: resolve. She would go to the gala. She wouldn't go to impress Gregory or to win back old friends. She would go for herself, to prove that her worth wasn't tied to a man's name or a seat at the head table. She would walk into that glittering hall as Audrey Miller, owner of the Gilded Spoon, and that would be more than enough. The Grand Imperial Hotel ballroom was exactly as Audrey remembered it. A cavernous space of gilded ceilings, colossal crystal chandeliers, and the suffocating scent of lilies and old money. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a polite veneer over the low hum of power plays and social maneuvering. Stepping through the arched entryway felt like diving into a cold, deep ocean. The pressure in her chest was immediate and immense. She clutched her small beaded purse, her knuckles white. Her sapphire dress, which had felt so empowering in the shop, now seemed woefully inadequate amidst the cacophony of designer gowns. Women floated past in clouds of tulle and taffeta, their laughter sharp and brittle. Men in bespoke tuxedos stood in tight circles, their voices a low murmur of stock prices and political gossip. It was the same stage, but she no longer knew her lines. Her friend Jenna had been right about one thing: the free champagne. Audrey gratefully accepted a flute from a passing waiter, the cool glass a steadying presence in her trembling hand. She found a spot near a marble pillar, hoping to become part of the architecture, a silent observer. But there was no hiding. She soon spotted Patricia Carmichael, a woman whose charity lunches she had attended for years. Patricia's eyes met hers, widened for a fraction of a second in surprise, and then she offered a tight, pitying smile before turning abruptly back to her conversation. The message was clear. You are no longer one of us. The sting of it was sharp, a tiny, painful dart to her already fragile confidence. Another couple she knew well, the Harringtons, walked right past her, their gazes fixed firmly on a point over her head. The shunning was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. And then she saw him. Gregory Dawson made his entrance not by walking, but by holding court. He swept into the room with Tiffany Royce on his arm, a triumphant Roman general returning from a successful campaign. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way she had once mistaken for strength. His tuxedo was impeccable, his smile broad and confident. He thrived in these environments, soaking up the attention like a starved plant in a rainstorm. Tiffany was his perfect accessory. Her dress was a blinding sheath of silver sequins cut dangerously low. A diamond necklace, the famed Star of Astoria she had seen in magazines, blazed at her throat. She was loud, glittering, and possessive, her hand locked onto Gregory's bicep. They were a spectacle, and the room turned to watch them. Audrey felt her breath catch. Seeing him still had a physical effect on her, a phantom limb of a life that had been amputated. She saw the way he scanned the room, his eyes flicking over the crowd with an air of ownership. And then his gaze landed on her. It wasn't a glance. It was a lock. Time seemed to slow as his eyes narrowed. A flicker of surprise followed by something else, a predatory gleam. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. He hadn't just seen her. He had recognized an opportunity. He leaned down and whispered something in Tiffany's ear, and the younger woman's perfectly glossed lips curled into a matching sneer. They started moving towards her, not directly, but in a circling pattern like sharks sensing blood in the water. They stopped to greet a councilman, to laugh with a banking CEO, but their trajectory was undeniable. They were coming for her. Every instinct screamed at Audrey to run, to slip out a side door and melt back into the anonymity of her quiet life. That was what he wanted. He wanted her to flee, to prove him right, to show everyone she couldn't handle the world she had been cast out of. The champagne flute felt slick in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. But then she thought of the gilded spoon. She thought of getting up at 4 a.m. to knead dough. She thought of the pride she felt when she finally perfected her salted caramel macarons. She thought of the quiet strength she had painstakingly built from the rubble of her marriage. She had not survived Gregory's storm just to be swept away by a little rain. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and lifted her chin. She would not run. She would stand her ground, a solitary pillar of sapphire blue in a room full of predators. Let them come. The air grew thick as Gregory and Tiffany finally closed the distance. Gregory's cologne, a sharp citrusy scent she had once loved, now smelled acrid and suffocating. He stopped a few feet from her, his head tilted in a pantomime of surprise. "Audrey, I can't believe it. I almost didn't recognize you," he began, his voice pitched, just loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. It was his classic opening gambit, feigned friendliness, masking a razor-sharp insult. The implication was clear. She was so diminished, so changed that she was barely recognizable. "Hello, Gregory," she said, her own voice remarkably steady. She looked past him to his companion. "Tiffany?" Tiffany Royce looked Audrey up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal designed to intimidate. Her eyes, expertly lined in black, lingered on the simple cut of Audrey's dress. "Gregory, darling, you didn't tell me that Audrey would be here. How brave of you to come alone," she said, her voice a syrupy drawl. "Audrey has always been full of surprises." Gregory continued, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Look at you. So simple. It's a good look for you. Very down to earth." He gestured vaguely at her dress. "It suits your new situation." Each word was a carefully chosen weapon. Simple. Down to earth. He was framing her as provincial, a commoner who had wandered into the king's court by mistake. He was reinforcing the narrative he had sold to their entire social circle, that he was the sophisticated visionary and she was the small-town girl who couldn't keep up. Audrey refused to take the bait. "I like my new situation, Gregory. I'm running my own business. I'm sure you've heard." A loud theatrical laugh erupted from Tiffany. "Oh, we have the little cupcake shop. It's just the quaintest thing I've ever heard. Do you wear a little apron with flour on your nose? It sounds like something out of a movie." The condescension was suffocating. Several people nearby had stopped their own conversations to listen, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and feigned indifference. This was the drama they had come for. Gregory placed a hand over his heart in a gesture of mock sincerity. "I'm proud of you, I really am. It takes a lot of guts to go from managing a household staff of 12 to frosting cupcakes. But I always knew you had a knack for the domestic arts." He was twisting her accomplishment into a failure, recasting her ambition as a demotion. He wanted to shame her for working, for building something with her own two hands. To him, and to this crowd, success was not earned. It was inherited, married into, or acquired through ruthless acquisition. Her hard work was in their eyes a mark of desperation. "It's called being a pastry chef." Audrey corrected her voice low and tight. It's a profession. A difficult one. Of course, Gregory said dismissively. He then turned to Mr. Abernathy, a powerful real estate developer standing nearby, and drew him into the conversation. Walter, you remember my ex-wife Audrey. She's the one I was telling you about. Couldn't quite handle the pressures of our world. The charity boards, the fundraisers. It was all a bit much for her. But she's found her calling now. Baking. We're all so thrilled she's found her level. It was a masterclass in public assassination. In one fell swoop, he had defined her to a key business figure as incompetent, overwhelmed, and mentally frail. He was poisoning the well, ensuring that even if she tried to network for her business tonight, she would be met with pity and dismissal. Audrey felt her face flush with a hot, furious blush. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her throat felt tight, and for a terrifying moment she thought she might cry. That's what he wanted. He wanted a scene. He wanted her to break down, to run away in tears, proving his every word correct. She looked at his smug face, at Tiffany's triumphant smirk, at the curious, judgmental eyes of the onlookers. And in that moment, the hurt and shame curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger. He would not break her. He had taken her house, her money, and her past, but he would not take her dignity. Not here, not tonight. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, meeting Gregory's gaze over the rim of the glass. It's true, Walter, she said, turning to the developer with a calm, steady smile. The pressures of Gregory's world were immense. It's a full-time job pretending to admire a man who measures his worth in acquisitions, isn't it? I found I preferred creating things of actual value. You should stop by the bakery sometime. Unlike some investments, my cakes offer a guaranteed return of happiness. Abernathy blinked momentarily, speechless. A few onlookers shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't screamed or cried. She had hit back with elegance and a barb of her own. Gregory's smile faltered for a second, his eyes flashing with fury. He had expected tears, not wit. He was losing control of the narrative. He opened his mouth to retort, but just then the auctioneer's voice boomed over the speakers, calling the guests to pay attention to the stage. The moment was broken, but the battle had just begun. Gregory gave her a look that promised retribution. This was far from over. The charity auction was the centerpiece of the evening, a chance for the city's wealthiest to outbid one another for extravagant prizes, while burnishing their philanthropic reputations. Audrey usually found the display of ego-driven giving distasteful, but tonight she watched with a specific interest. The final item on the list was a private donation to the St. Jude's Youth Art Collective, a small underfunded program that provided art supplies and mentorship to inner-city kids. It was a charity Audrey had championed for years, one she had personally introduced to the Gala committee. Her mother, an amateur painter, had believed passionately in the power of art to change young lives. Supporting the collective was the one piece of her old life she refused to let Gregory take from her. The auctioneer, a jovial man with a booming voice, introduced the donation. And now, folks, for our final item, a chance to become the sole patron of the St. Jude's Youth Art Collective for an entire year. This donation funds everything from canvases to clay, and it gives these incredible kids a safe space to create. We'll start the bidding at $5,000. Audrey's heart gave a hopeful leap. The Gilded Spoon had had a surprisingly good quarter. She had done the math a dozen times. She could afford $5,000. It would be a stretch, but it was important. It was a way to reclaim a part of her legacy, to do some good in a world that had felt so cruel. $5,000, she called out, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. A few heads turned in her direction, surprised. The auctioneer smiled. $5,000 from the lovely lady in blue? A wonderful start. Do I hear 6? $10,000! A voice boomed from the front of the room. It was Gregory. He didn't even look at the auctioneer. He stared directly at Audrey, a challenging smirk on his face. The bid was pointed, and immediate escalation meant to put her in her place. The room buzzed. This was no longer about charity. It was a duel. Audrey's jaw tightened. He was doing this purely to spite her. He had never cared about the art collective. He'd always called it her little pet project. But he couldn't stand the thought of her getting a win, however small. Fine. Two could play this game. 11,000? She called back, her gaze locked with his. 20,000. Gregory shot back, instantly leaning back in his chair and placing an arm around Tiffany, who giggled as if he'd just told a clever joke. The numbers were escalating far beyond what Audrey could afford. He knew it. Everyone knew it. He was no longer bidding against her. He was bidding against her empty bank account. He was publicly demonstrating his financial superiority, painting her as a pathetic pauper, trying to play in a league she no longer belonged to. The guests were watching with rapt attention, their faces illuminated by the stage lights. It was Bloodsport dressed up in black tie. Audrey felt a wave of nausea. She had to stop. Continuing would be fiscally insane. But stopping meant letting him win. It meant letting him publicly crush the one thing she cared about on this auction block. Her pride warred with her common sense. 21,000. She said, her voice barely a whisper. It was a reckless, desperate move. She didn't have $21,000 to spare. She would have to take out a loan max out her credit cards. Gregory laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was a cold, sharp bark of victory. He stood up, ensuring everyone could see him. $50,000, he announced, his voice dripping with condescending pity. Let's end this little game, shall we? I think my dear ex-wife has had enough excitement for one night. The humiliation was absolute. It was a punch to the gut. The auctioneer, sensing the kill, didn't even wait for a counter. $50,000 to the generous Mr. Gregory Dawson, sold. The room erupted in polite applause. Gregory took a bow, a conquering hero. He turned to Tiffany and kissed her theatrically, as if the donation was a gift to her. He had not only won the bid, he had stripped Audrey of her cause, her dignity, and her last ounce of hope for the evening. The pitying stares were back now, mixed with a kind of morbid satisfaction. The fallen queen had tried to climb back to her throne and had been swatted down with contemptuous ease. Tears pricked at Audrey's eyes, hot and shameful. She couldn't stay here a moment longer. She turned her body, moving on autopilot, and fled the ballroom. She pushed past waiters and guests, ignoring their curious glances. She needed air. She needed to escape the suffocating weight of 1,000 judgmental eyes. She stumbled out onto a deserted stone terrace, the cool night air a shock to her burning skin. She leaned against the balustrade, the city lights a blurry, indifferent sprawl below, and finally let the tears fall. He had won. He had utterly, completely, and cruelly won. The terrace was an oasis of quiet. The muffled sounds of the gala, the music, the applause, the laughter seemed a world away. Audrey wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of her dress doing little to ward off the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The tears tracked silently down her cheeks, carrying with them the frustration, the anger, and the deep, aching hurt of the last hour. She felt foolish and weak, exactly as Gregory had intended. She was so lost in her own misery that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching on the stone floor. That was a cruel performance. True charity doesn't require a victim. The voice was low and resonant, calm and steady. It held no pity, only a quiet statement of fact. Audrey startled, quickly wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. She turned to see a man standing in the shadows near the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit with no flashy watch or ostentatious cufflinks. He seemed to be an island of stillness in the chaos of the evening. His hair was dark with streaks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, even in the dim light, were sharp and intelligent. He looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. "I'm sorry," she stammered, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness. "I was just getting some air." "There's no need to apologize," he said, taking a step forward into the soft glow of a sconce. You have nothing to be sorry for. Your ex-husband, on the other hand, should be ashamed of himself." Audrey stared at him. No one had spoken in her defense. No one had dared. In her old life, siding against Gregory Dawson was social suicide. "You saw that." "Everyone saw it," he replied with a slight mirthless smile. It was difficult to miss. He wanted an audience. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "You championed the St. Jude's program, didn't you, years ago? You were the one who brought it to the committee's attention." She was taken aback. "How did you know that?" "I make it my business to know where my money is going," he said simply. He extended a hand. "Alexander Cole." The name hit her like a physical blow. Alexander Cole. The Alexander Cole. The reclusive billionaire. A titan of industry in tech and logistics, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in every boardroom in the country. He rarely made public appearances, and his photo was seldom in the papers. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of high finance, and he was standing here on this terrace talking to her. She numbly shook his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "Audrey Miller," she said, her voice small. "I know," he said, and the way he said it made her feel seen, not as Gregory's pathetic ex-wife, but as herself. "I also know you're the owner of a bakery called the Gilded Spoon. Your lavender honey eclairs are a work of art." Audrey's jaw nearly dropped. "You've been to my bakery. My assistant picks up an order every Friday morning. I have a notorious sweet tooth." He admitted, a genuine smile finally touching his lips, transforming his severe face into something surprisingly warm. "Your work is precise, innovative, and clearly a labor of love. It's the mark of a true artisan." To hear her work, her passion, described with such respect by a man of his stature was so unexpected, so jarringly different from the condescension she had just endured, that she felt a fresh wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm her. It wasn't pity. It was validation. "He doesn't see that," she found herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Gregory, he just sees cupcakes, something small and quaint to be mocked." "Men like your ex-husband don't see value," Mr. Cole corrected gently. "They only recognize price tags. He tried to buy a victory tonight, but all he purchased was a monument to his own insecurity. The work you do at St. Jude's, the business you're building, that has actual value. It cannot be bought at auction." His words were a balm on a raw wound. He spoke with a quiet authority that was more powerful than all of Gregory's blustering and posturing. For the first time all night, Audrey felt her shoulders begin to relax. She was talking to someone who wasn't judging her through the lens of her divorce or her bank account. He was simply seeing her. And in that moment, that was everything. Their conversation flowed easily after that. He asked about her bakery, not with polite disinterest, but with the sharp, insightful questions of a man who understood business from the ground up. He wanted to know about her supply chain, her profit margins, her plans for expansion. Audrey, who was used to her ambitions being dismissed, found herself speaking with a passion and confidence she hadn't felt in years. The warmth of their exchange was abruptly shattered by a familiar, unwelcome voice. "There you are. I was wondering where you'd run off to." Gregory stood in the doorway to the terrace, a possessive, triumphant look on his face. He had obviously come to gloat to witness the full extent of her tears and despair, but his expression faltered when he saw she wasn't alone. It curdled into a mixture of confusion and annoyance when he recognized her companion. "Alexander, good to see you," Gregory said, his tone shifting instantly to one of fawning familiarity. He strode forward, hand outstretched. "Gregory Dawson, I don't think we've been formally introduced, but we have a meeting with your acquisitions team next Tuesday." Alexander Cole looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment before slowly, deliberately shaking it. "Mr. Dawson, I'm aware." Gregory's chest puffed out, basking in the perceived acknowledgement from the most powerful man in the room. He then turned his attention back to Audrey, his dismissiveness returning like a shroud. "Don't let my ex-wife bore you with her sob stories, Alexander," Gregory said with a chummy laugh as if sharing an inside joke. She gets a bit dramatic. The divorce was hard on her. She's still adjusting to the real world. He put a hand on Audrey's arm, a gesture of ownership she flinched away from. Come on, Audrey. You've made your point. It's time for you to go home. It was the final patronizing insult. He was treating her like a child who had thrown a tantrum and needed to be sent to her room. He was asserting his dominance not just over her but in front of Alexander Cole. But Mr. Cole did not laugh. His calm demeanor vanished, replaced by an arctic chill that seemed to drop the temperature on the terrace by 10 degrees. He took a small step forward, positioning himself slightly between Audrey and her ex-husband. On the contrary, Mr. Dawson, Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. I find Mrs. Miller's company refreshing. She speaks of value creation and passion. You, on the other hand, have spent the evening engaged in a rather vulgar display of cruelty. It's your company I find tiresome. Gregory froze. The blood drained from his face, his smug smile collapsing into a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. He had been so sure of his place in the hierarchy, so certain that a man like Cole would see Audrey as he did an irrelevant nobody. He had miscalculated. Horrifically. Before Gregory could even process the rebuke, Alexander Cole did the unthinkable. He turned his back on Gregory completely, a social gesture as brutal and final as a slap in the face. He faced Audrey, his expression softening once more. He extended his hand to her, not for a handshake, but as an invitation. Audrey, he said, his voice warm and clear, easily carrying in the sudden silence. Would you do me the honor of joining me at my table? The world seemed to stop. It was a simple question, but it was a declaration. In front of her tormentor, in front of anyone who might be watching from the ballroom. The most powerful man in the city was publicly, unequivocally choosing her. He was offering her his protection, his respect, and his alliance. Audrey looked from Alexander's outstretched hand to Gregory's stunned, furious face. For the first time she saw not a powerful tycoon, but a small petty man stripped of his bravado. A bully who had just had his favorite toy taken away. A slow smile spread across Audrey's face. A real one. She placed her hand in Alexander's. His fingers closed around hers, a silent promise of support. I would love that, Alexander, she said. Together they turned and walked back into the grand ballroom, leaving Gregory Dawson alone on the terrace, utterly and completely humiliated. The return to the ballroom was like walking through the parting of the Red Sea. If Gregory's entrance had caused a stir, Audrey's re-entrance on the arm of Alexander Cole caused a seismic shock. Every conversation faltered. Every head turned. The whispers that had followed Audrey all night, pitying, mocking, now changed their tune. They were whispers of shock, of confusion, and of frantic recalculation. Alexander led her not to a small table in the back, but to the most prominent table in the room, right at the edge of the dance floor where the host committee and the guests of honor were seated. He pulled out a chair for her with an effortless grace that made Gregory's earlier preening seem clumsy and oafish. As she sat, she could feel the burning stare of Patricia Carmichael, the woman who had snubbed her earlier. Now Patricia was looking at her with a desperate, ingratiating smile, as if they were the dearest of friends. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The power shift in the room was palpable. Social currency was being traded and reevaluated in real time. Audrey Miller, the pitiable ex-wife, was now Audrey Miller, the companion of Alexander Cole. Her value in the eyes of this fickle crowd had skyrocketed. Are you all right? Alexander asked quietly. His attention focused solely on her, as if the rest of the room didn't exist. I am now, Audrey said, a genuine feeling of lightness bubbling up inside her. Thank you. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he stated simply. Bullies only understand power, and a public stage requires a public response. He signaled a waiter. What Dawson did was not just an insult to you, it was an insult to the charity you believe in. Which reminds me. He pulled out a sleek black checkbook from his jacket pocket. With a few fluid strokes of a pen, he wrote out a check and folded it. He caught the eye of the Gala's director, who immediately hurried over to their table. "Mr. Cole, is everything to your satisfaction?" the director asked, his voice trembling slightly with nerves. "Everything is fine," Alexander said smoothly. "However, I'd like to make an additional donation, directly to the St. Jude's Youth Art Collective." He handed the folded check to the man. "I believe this should cover their patronage for the next 5 years. Please ensure Mrs. Miller is listed as the benefactor. It was her passion, after all, that brought it to my attention." The director unfolded the check. His eyes widened, and he audibly gasped. He looked from the staggering number of zeros on the check to Audrey, his expression a comical mix of awe and reverence. He stammered his thanks and scurried away, no doubt to spread the news. Audrey was speechless. "Alexander, that's $250,000. It's a rounding error in my quarterly reports," he said, not as a boast, but as a statement of fact. "But I suspect it will be life-changing for those children. That's a sound investment. Far better than the one I was considering making on Tuesday." His meaning was crystal clear. Just then Gregory returned to the ballroom, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He saw them at the head table, saw the gala director fawning over Audrey. He saw Walter Abernathy, the developer he'd tried to impress, now looking at him with an expression of distinct distaste. His public triumph had turned into an unmitigated disaster. News of Cole's donation and its designated benefactor spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Gregory wasn't the hero of the hour who had saved the charity. He was the petty tyrant who had tried to use it to humiliate his ex-wife, only to be one-upped on a monumental scale. His $50,000 victory now looked like a cheap, pathetic stunt. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face paling even further. It was an email from his secretary. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting with Cole Enterprises canceled." The deal was dead. The multi-million-dollar partnership he had been counting on, the one that was supposed to elevate his company to the next level, had just evaporated into thin air. And he had no one to blame but himself. His attempt to ruin Audrey's night had just ruined his entire year. The days following the Starlight Gala were a blur for Audrey. Her phone rang off the hook. Old friends who hadn't spoken to her in a year called to catch up. Event planners who had once ignored her emails were now begging her to cater their high-profile parties. The story of Gregory's public downfall and her alliance with the enigmatic Alexander Cole had become the talk of the town. The Gilded Spoon was suddenly the most fashionable bakery in the city. She had to hire 2 new assistants just to handle the influx of orders. Alexander was true to his word. He became not a savior, but a mentor and a friend. He saw the potential in her business and offered her a low-interest loan to expand not as a gift, but as a formal business arrangement. "I never make an investment I don't expect a return on," he'd told her, his eyes twinkling. "And I expect great returns from you, Ms. Miller." With his guidance and capital, she was able to lease the storefront next door, tripling her space and installing a small cafe section. The Gilded Spoon was finally becoming the business she had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, Gregory Dawson's world was imploding. The canceled deal with Cole Enterprises was just the beginning. Word of his behavior at the gala spread through the city's tight-knit business community. Alexander Cole had subtly but surely blacklisted him. Partners pulled out of deals, citing a sudden lack of confidence in Gregory's leadership. His reputation, which he had so carefully curated, was now in tatters. He was no longer seen as a powerful player, but as a reckless, cruel man with poor judgment. The final blow came from Tiffany Royce. Once it became clear that Gregory's star was not just falling but crashing to earth, her affection cooled considerably. The society blogs which had once breathlessly chronicled their romance now reported on their amicable split, with Tiffany being spotted on the arm of a much older and much richer European duke a week later. Gregory was left with nothing but his tarnished name and a $50,000 tax receipt for a donation that now served only as a reminder of his spectacular self-destruction. 6 months after the gala, Audrey stood outside her newly expanded bakery. A beautiful hand-painted sign, "The Gilded Spoon Café," hung above the door. Today was the grand reopening. The cafe was filled with chattering customers, supportive friends like Jenna, and a quiet, smiling Alexander Cole, who was sitting at a corner table enjoying what he still claimed was the best eclair in the world. A delivery truck pulled up and a man dropped off the morning papers. The headline on the business section caught her eye: Dawson Industries files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. She read the first few lines of the article, which detailed Gregory's fall from grace, citing the loss of the Cole Enterprises deal as the fatal catalyst. She looked at the photo of him accompanying the article, a grainy shot of him leaving a courthouse, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He looked small, defeated. She felt no glee, no triumphant surge of vindictive joy. She simply felt closure. A quiet, peaceful sense of an ending. His fate was no longer tied to hers. His downfall wasn't her victory. Her success was. Her victory was the warm, bustling cafe behind her, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of laughter, the life she had built not from the ashes of her marriage, but from the strength of her own two hands. Alexander caught her eye from across the room and raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. She smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile of a woman who was finally truly free. The sweetest revenge wasn't watching him fall. It was learning to fly on her own. The autumn leaves were turning shades of gold and crimson outside Audrey's apartment window, a gentle, beautiful change that mirrored the transformation in her own life. The frantic energy of the grand reopening had settled into a comfortable, busy rhythm. The Gilded Spoon Cafe was more than a success. It was a community hub, a place of warmth and comfort that was a direct reflection of its owner. Audrey no longer woke with a knot of dread in her stomach, but with a mind buzzing with new ideas for seasonal macarons and intricate cake designs. She was sketching in her notebook one evening, the scent of cinnamon and cloves from an experimental tart still lingering in the air, when a soft knock came at her door. It was Alexander Cole. He wasn't dressed in his usual sharp business suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked relaxed, younger, and held a single perfect white orchid in one hand. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Never." Audrey smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "And you know perfectly well my neighborhood is a 20-minute drive from your office tower. What's the occasion?" He handed her the orchid. "No occasion. I just saw it and thought of you. It's elegant and resilient." His directness still caught her off guard sometimes, but now it was a pleasant surprise, not an intimidating one. Their relationship had evolved over the past months from mentor and mentee into a deep and easy friendship. He was her most frequent customer and her most trusted advisor. They spoke almost daily, their conversations meandering from business strategy to books, art, and the simple joys of a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. "Thank you, Alexander. It's beautiful," she said, finding a small vase for the flower. "Can I get you some tea? I have a new chai blend I'm working on." "I'd love some," he said, his eyes scanning the apartment. It was a space he'd been in several times, yet he always seemed to notice something new, a new cookbook, a piece of art she'd picked up at a local market. "Actually, I came here to ask you something. I have 2 tickets to the Philharmonic tomorrow night. They're playing Vivaldi. I know you're a fan." It wasn't a business event. It wasn't a charity gala. It was just an invitation, personal and thoughtful. She remembered him mentioning weeks ago how much she loved the emotional sweep of the 4 seasons. He had listened. He had remembered. "I would be delighted to go, Alexander," she said, her heart giving a little flutter that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the man standing in her living room. The concert hall was a world away from the Grand Imperial Hotel ballroom. The atmosphere wasn't one of social climbing and judgment, but of shared appreciation for beauty. As the first notes of spring filled the air vibrant and full of life, Audrey felt a profound sense of peace. She was here not as someone's plus one, not as an accessory, but as herself, sharing a beautiful experience with a friend. During the intermission, they stood on a balcony overlooking the city lights, much like the one where they had first truly spoken. "Do you ever think about that night at the gala?" Audrey asked quietly, not out of pain, but out of curiosity. Alexander turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I think about the injustice of it. I grew up with very little Audrey. I watched my father work himself to the bone for men who saw him as nothing more than a cog in their machine. They would belittle him, dismiss his ideas, and take credit for his labor. I promised myself I would never be that man, and that I would never stand by and watch someone else be treated that way." It was the most he had ever shared about his past. Suddenly his fierce defense of her that night made perfect sense. It wasn't just about chivalry. It was about a deeply ingrained sense of right and wrong forged in his own history. "You didn't just defend me that night, Alexander," she said, meeting his gaze. "You saw me. After years of feeling invisible, of having my own ambitions and ideas dismissed as hobbies, you saw the person I was trying to become. You didn't save me. You gave me the space to save myself." He reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. It was a simple, comforting gesture that felt more intimate than any grand romantic display. "Audrey, the woman you are today, was there all along. He just tried to bury her under the weight of his own ego. I didn't see potential. I saw reality." The final bell chimed, calling them back to their seats. As they walked back into the concert hall hand in hand, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. This wasn't a calculated move on a social chessboard. It was a quiet, unassuming beginning. A new piece of music just for them, filled with the promise of a future built not on power or prestige, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and the simple, profound act of truly seeing one another. And there you have it. A story about how the attempt to publicly shame someone can backfire in the most spectacular way. Audrey's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the name you carry or the money in your bank account. It's about dignity, resilience, and the courage to build a life on your own terms. Gregory thought he could destroy her by taking everything away, but he only succeeded in clearing the path for her to find her own power. The intervention of a kind stranger didn't save her. It simply illuminated the strength she had cultivated all along. What did you think of Gregory's karmic justice? Was it satisfying to see his world crumble because of his own cruelty? We love hearing your thoughts and opinions, so please drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of this story. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.